Welcome back to another lesson with me, Mr. B. Now we will make a transition over to various readings around forms of oppression. We'll be looking at excerpts from the Chinook Fund and Paulo Freire's book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Paulo Freire was a Brazilian educator and author. His focus was to educate illiterate adults, and particularly those who were working without an education. His book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, was popular, read, and understood by many illiterate and third world country citizens. This book itself became banned in certain countries as it taught minorities and marginalized peoples to rise up against oppression and resist. You could even think of the same way people internationally rose up for Black Lives Matter, stopping Asian hate, even standing with Ukraine. Some popular phrases that come from Paulo Freire's work is this idea of if you know your history, then you know yourself. And if there is no history, then there is no self. As he kind of says right here, without a sense of identity, there can be no real struggle, which hints at that same notion. If there is no history to be recorded or to look at, then there is no sense of self. And that looking at the past must only be a means of understanding more clearly what and who they are, so they can more wisely build the future. So if you know your past in a sense of times of war, different forms of oppression, let's just say slavery, then history won't repeat itself because we know the bad things that came as a result of things like genocide of indigenous peoples or slavery of African Americans. So the point of these next few lessons is to understand the idea of oppression and how it's present in institutions. The eyes of oppression are going to be the driving lenses in everything we look at in this course. There's ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. And they're set up in this diagram to show how they're connected. Ideological oppression is within each of the eyes, whereas each of them from the top to the bottom represents how it affects things from a macro to micro scale. To help us make sense of the eyes of oppression, first let's just talk about what is oppression. Well, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, oppression is defined as unjust or cruel exercise of authority of power. Throughout the next few lessons, we're going to be looking back at the animated series Avatar: The Last Airbender to help us make sense of these critical concepts. And this will be a 3-part series on the eyes of oppression and critical concepts from Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So first, let's continue with the foundation of what it says right here, oppressor and oppressed. The oppressor is the people or groups holding power and using it to keep other groups under control. So in this case, if you've watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, like the GIF that's playing in the back, there is an Earth nation that is corrupted by their police force known as the Dai Li. And they use their power from the king to keep other parts of the capital segregated and under control. Whether or not you've watched the series, there are numerous examples of oppressed peoples throughout the series. Like over here in panel number 1, it's a scene of a vagabond or a homeless man affected by the capitalism of the Earth Kingdom monarchy. Or whereas in number 2, there is a cabbage merchant whose crops aren't good enough to be put into the city. So the security, or the officers in this case, just launch his cart of cabbages off the mountainside. Or number 4, where one of the main characters, who was once considered a hero to the Fire Nation, is now imprisoned and treated as a traitor. The oppressed are individuals or groups being denied rights or human treatment. And just like the examples I pointed out in 1, 2, and 4, each of these scenes demonstrate a different form of oppression, which we'll get into in this 3-part series. I hope that was a clear overview of the difference between oppressors and the oppressed. You may even see connections between the master and counter narratives. Up next, we're going to break down ideological and institutional oppression, then interpersonal and internalized in the next one. All right, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.